Welcome to Women Igniting.
Thank you for joining the Win Show. Listen, we have a wonderful show planned today. This is part 2 of a discussion, domestic violence. And we have a great guest that's been on the show before, and she's going to give you some insight in what you can do to help somebody who's going through this situation. I'll see you when you get back. Welcome back to the Win Show. Thank you for tuning in. I have a wonderful guest with me. Thank you, Mikila Thompson, attorney, was on our show before, and we are at part 2 of dealing with domestic violence. You know, we can talk about this so much, but I just want to hone in on the whole thing. Why do we have to deal with domestic violence? It's so aggressive in a season like this.
Right.
Just kind of tell me. It's just bad.
I think the problem is that our society is still struggling with the understanding that the man is not the only person that can steer the ship of a household, of a workplace. I think that what we're seeing with the Me Too movement is really shifting the landscape and the focus, and showing that, you know, women and also male victims of domestic violence are entitled to their voice. And are entitled to make sure that people understand that it's not okay. Right. That, you know, it shouldn't be something that they have to endure.
Right. You know, and you kind of cover a vast of different areas, being an attorney. And one of the areas I know you deal with DV is also the sexual abuse aspect of different things that people go through. Yes. Now, I am a SVU, you know, special victims fanatic. I watch this show all the time. Oh, I like to see we have that in common. But it's really true what people really go through with that. I had a family member that actually went through domestic violence, and it's such a gripping fear. Yes. Whether male or female, whoever is the victim in this. Absolutely. But it is such a gripping fear that they go through. What do you do and what do you offer? Because it's a mindset. Yes. It's almost like a reprogramming. Exactly. You know what I mean? To understand that someone can't control you. Yes. What do you offer? What kind of programs?
Well, at the Safer Center Long Island, we offer counseling to start. And I think when we go out as a crisis counselor, I volunteer as a crisis counselor, and the first thing we do is try to remind the person that anything leading up to this point that they've endured is not their fault. Victims of or survivors of domestic violence oftentimes blame themselves. They believe that if they hadn't, you know, if they just walked away the first time, if they hadn't, you know, looked at the person a certain way, or if they had just said what the person wanted them to say, that this wouldn't have happened. And so my first task when I meet them at the hospital is just to tell them it's not your fault. It's okay. Right. That you feel the way you feel, but you shouldn't blame yourself. Right. And that you need to understand that this person was wrong, and that they wronged you, and it's not okay, and that they violated you. And slowly we start that process of reprogramming, so that they understand that they have more for them on their own and moving forward.
Now, if I could use this term, the revolving door, that's just something I just was thinking about. And sometimes people can be very critical, and maybe sometimes judgmental, because I'm finding that until you're in any situation in life, none of us would know how we would even handle it. Absolutely. You understand what I'm saying? Yes. So how do you deal with the woman and or the man, in the case what we're talking about, who finds themselves back in it? You know, we talked about the fear, we talked about the control, but they leave, because I know people have left, but they come right back. What do you do with that?
You have to kind of reinforce that they can overcome this. Because I think when you go into, well, you should have left, or, you know, I told you so, that just sets them right back to the square one. And so when you have a person, whether it's a friend, family member, in my case it might be a person that's been in the hospital before, and I find out that this is a repeat situation, I'm not going to say, well, why did you go back? Because it's a mindset thing. Domestic violence is not the act of the physical violence, it's what happens before it. It's all of the mind games, it's all of the manipulation, all the psychological things that happen to a person
Right.
leading up to the act. And so I have to just encourage them to return to the positive things that they can engage in, whether it's counseling, whether it's having someone just be there for them,
Right.
Someone they can talk to, and not really talk about why they may have gone back or beat them over the head verbally for repeating and going back into that environment.
So then where does emotional abuse fit into the picture?
I often believe emotional abuse is the worst. Emotional abuse, there are several situations of domestic violence where there was no physical interaction at all.
Right.
And in my role as an attorney, I represent children in family court. There are several times I come into cases where it was pure emotional abuse. And I think it's hard because since domestic violence in general is oftentimes psychological, emotional abuse can be 10 times worse because it's only that. It's only psychological, it's only mind games, it's only verbal attacks. And you're beating a person down, you're killing their self-esteem. And they need reinforcement in a positive way, more so than most other victims, because there is no physical thing. It's harder for them to express it to someone because they don't feel they have proof. They don't. There's no scar that I can see.
Yeah.
But you can tell. You kind of can see the signs, and most physical violence is precursored by emotional abuse.
What are some of the signs?
Isolation. When you might have a family member who suddenly they don't go anywhere, they stop coming to family functions, your best friend stops hanging out with you, suddenly if she does, her partner has to come, or all of a sudden they up and move. I've several times where I've had families I work with where they're originally from a totally different part of the country. And I'm like, well, why did you come to New York? It's easier to manipulate someone when they're alone, when they're vulnerable. Stop caring about how they look. They start to really, you start hearing them say negative things about themselves. Domestic violence is a form of bullying. So it's all of the same mind games. That person has power over you. And they will chip away at who you are because they don't want who you are. They want who they want you to be. And so they play around with and basically try to mold you into who they want you to be.
We did a show, this is probably years ago, we did a show with dealing with domestic violence and dating. And I have to tell you, Mikila, that was one of the most watched shows that we had taped years ago.
I could definitely.
I would dare have to say that that's probably still appropriate for the times that we're living in. And it just happened to be a family member. And I didn't even know. Now, this is why I was actually about the signs, like what people should know and what they could, because I think there has to be some kind of resources have to be available.
Yes.
Because I'm being honest with you, I didn't even know. Like the person was like, the person could have been standing right next to me.
And you wouldn't have
when I tell you, I didn't know. So, and I remember somebody mentioned to me, did you notice so-and-so was being hurt? And to my surprise, the person never told me. Just like what we're talking about, there was never a sign that I can see. So then my question was, what happened to the strength? Because the person always exemplified this internal strength. Like, you would have never thought this person went through that.
Most people,
you know what I mean?
They actually learn it's a learned behavior.
So
while you have the abuser exerting this power, you have the victim, the survivor, who is learning how to dance the dance. And so their outward person that you see is not the person who's being beaten at home. They learn how to put on makeup, and they learn how to make up their personality. They learn how to make up their mannerisms. They would never most likely say anything about it, but they've learned how to kind of maneuver through life. And so you have to look very closely. Only people, I think, either professionals or someone who knows the person really well can start picking apart the signs, because you have to look for those subtle changes, very subtle. Suddenly they have an opinion about something totally opposite. And you notice, like, you could be at a family gathering and you notice that the partner or the husband or their boyfriend or girlfriend is the one kind of talking the most. You suddenly hear that they're very quiet. They don't say much when their partner is around. Or they refer to their partner about everything. And so it's not foolproof. Obviously, there are some people who just fall in love hard, and their partner absorbs their world. But even in that, that's dangerous. It may not be domestic violence, but one should never lose themselves totally in another person, because things can change very quickly. And so you just have to look for subtle signs, and just, you might not want to face the person head on and say, I'm really concerned that something's happening, but you could just kind of subtly encourage them and subtly remind them of who they are and empower them. Positive reinforcement, just generally, not related to the abuse, just in general.
Why do you think most victims don't come forward? I mean, is there a stigma?
Absolutely. There's definitely a stigma. I mean, there's so many things. Depends on the person that they're in a relationship with. That person may be a person of means, a person of power. There's a large percentage of overall, especially now, I would say about 10% of domestic violence victims stay in the relationships because of finances and because of a vulnerability that they're attached to. It could be they're undocumented, and that person uses that over their head. It could be they helped them years ago with something within the family, and they need them to help them with a family member's crisis. People stay for their own personal reasons, but to them it's huge. And you don't want to minimize the reasoning behind it. You just have to kind of help that person see who they are on their own and bolster them up, like boost them up and make them feel better about who they are.
Wow. Oftentimes with domestic violence cases, police get involved.
Yes.
But there's been times where people have gotten hurt. I don't think there's any clear answer to getting through something like this, because how do you're trying to protect your children. So what do you say to a mother? In this case, let's say a mother. There's children involved. A family's being torn apart.
So
what do you say?
It's interesting, because of my cases that I have that I do in court, I would say about 50 to 60% of them are domestic violence cases. And that means that the Child Protective Services has gotten involved because a domestic violence incident took place. And the police were called, and they believe that this person is a danger to the children, whether they're a parent or not, of that child or children. And I think when the parent who is the victim sees that this is affecting, they kind of see it head on through the court system and everything, it oftentimes does make a change happen. Or if they don't feel like they can oftentimes go in the opposite direction and defend the person. Doesn't mean they don't love their children. But they feel they can handle it, they can control it. It goes back to that person who creates this persona that they can live through. And so when you have people, whether it's therapists, family members, I've definitely utilized, the mother of the parent, like a grandmother or a family friend, and said, listen, you got to talk to them. He's not worth losing your children over. Because it has happened where my clients have been placed in foster care due to an issue of domestic violence, especially if it was resulted in a very grave situation for the parent, and they don't think that the victim can defend the children. The fear is always that this person may escalate. More often than not, they don't necessarily do that, especially if it's their children involved, but you never know. And so I think when a person is faced with the possibility of losing their children, they do oftentimes make changes. But even in that, you have to make sure you capture the true meaning behind it, meaning getting them the help. Not for the moment, not so that they keep their kids in the home, so that they can see that they are valuable people and that their purpose is beyond the person that has done this to them.
That's excellent. Well, we're going to take a commercial break, and we're going to come back with Attorney Thompson. She has a lot to offer in dealing with domestic violence. We'll see you when we come back. As we get together, ladies and gentlemen, that we be there for one another. I am a firm believer that there should always be a forum where you can share. And I'm also a firm believer that it's important that if somebody comes, they have to know that they can trust you. and people know that about me. I'm a very transparent person, but I'm also a person that people can trust me with what they say to me. And I tell people there's nothing you can never say to me where I will look down on you, that I'll think anything negative about you. I have my own issues and my own struggles, and many of us on the line today can admit to the fact that we've had our own things that we've dealt with. I've raised 3 daughters. Welcome back to the Win Show. I'm sitting with Attorney Thompson, dealing with a very serious subject today, domestic violence. I think all of us can definitely say we know somebody or some kind of friend or family member that have gone through this. And today we're getting some great resource information on what to do. You know, when we ended from before the commercial break, I want to go back to something you said that was powerful. I want to talk about the repeated behavior. They say, like they have the saying called, each one can reach one. Right. But it can be for the negative too.
Right.
So what do you do in a case like that?
Well, I think it depends on what stage that this behavior is in. If you, for example, if you notice that a child it can be a person in your family or a friend, that is unfortunately a child involved in the family of domestic violence, I think you want to shower as much love and affection on that child as possible. And whether male or female, they can learn the behavior of being the victim or the abuser. Studies have shown that children that are part of the family structure of a domestic violence situation are more, I think it's like 10 to 20 times more likely to exhibit one or both of those behaviors in some way, shape, or form in their relationship. And so you want to make sure that the child, you try to prevent the outcome of that happening. Intensive therapy, if they're really young, play therapy, shower them with encouragement and positive reinforcement. If they're older and there's a possibility that they may repeat that behavior, it's again trying to diminish that anger, that angry feeling. And a person can be angry and become the victim just as much as the abuser, because certain behaviors can manifest and become issues of self-esteem, where they start to believe that they're not worth it. And self-hatred can exhibit itself as an abuser. I mean, you think about it, for a person to want to harm another person that they love, they must not love themselves very much.
Of course.
And so you have to, I think the central part is making sure that they have a certain level of self-love, and you encourage them to destroy that part of themselves that they seem to hate.
You know, I'm definitely a firm believer in stopping the cycle. Coming out of an abusive background, my own self having been abused as a child, you know, it's something you said. I can remember times, Mikila, where that not having that self-love, you know, just understanding who I was, or you used another word before, the value. Understanding my value, even growing up. I mean, I was abused for those 12 years of my life, but it played a very increment role in my life. I'm just sitting here listening to you talking. I'm going, wow, imagine if I had somebody in my corner to kind of help me get through that. So helping that child in the, can I use infancy stage of the situation? It makes, when I tell you, it makes
does.
a world of difference, because I found that I was almost like a person that was just walking around in a fog.
Yeah.
You've been abused, and then you're like,
Right.
and I wasn't able to hone in on everything. And then one day, it just came crashing down on me, where I literally lost it. Because my mom went through the emotional abuse. She went through the physical abuse. She went through it all. And here we are as the children.
Exactly.
As you mentioned, you're trying to protect the parent, which is my mother, but then you get abused on top of that even more because of the protection. And our house was filled with such anger that you just mentioned. It was filled with just all kinds of tension.
Dysfunction.
Oh my God, I could just, everything. It was almost, it was robotic.
Right.
That's the word I'm thinking, robotic. Mom knew when she went to work that Thursday, she came home, the paycheck had to be on the table. Spaghetti was for dinner every Thursday. Kool-Aid was made with all this sugar. It was so robotic. And then I remember my stepfather sitting back like the king of the crop, like, okay, I'm running this ship.
Absolutely.
But it destroys families.
It does. And the problem with that is, you mentioned that your family was robotic.
Yeah.
That is usually the way it's set up. It seems structured. They're so structured.
true.
Everything seems perfect.
Right.
But what really was happening is your mother started learning how to manage what was happening.
That's good.
So she put the paycheck on the table a certain way, not catty corner.
Right.
Because any little thing that would set him off would destroy the structure that seemed to go forward. And that is unbelievably what happens in most domestic violence relationships that endure for years.
It's true.
They learn how to manage. And it's awful, because every time a victim learns how to manage, they're chipping away at themselves. They are not themselves. They are behaving the way this person wants them to behave.
It's true.
And what's even worse is that the abuser hasn't, the only thing that they're craving is this power. There's no end to it. It's not like they may feel like they're in charge, but it's a cycle that continues with no end.
Oh, I love
they
that.
don't really know
That's
why
good.
they're doing it. They're just doing it.
That's interesting.
And after a while, it's just a part of their life.
My dear friend, who her son passed away, I was down in North Carolina a couple of months ago, you said something that made me think. She lived directly across the street, and I lived here. Do you know, she said to me, literally out of her own mouth several times, she almost envied me. Because I had the mom, I had the dad, just like you said, when she came over, we knew, oh, put on the face. It was almost like saying, action, lights, camera, action, you are on. And you know, Mikila, she said to me, she envied me, because she was like, wow, they have it so together. She had no idea that when the door closed, the physical started, the sexual started. She had no idea. And it's something how we learned how to pretend.
Yes. And that is,
we learned how to do it.
it's part of humans are animals, right?
Right.
We are part of the animal kingdom. And you learn how, it's a survival technique.
Yeah, that's it.
You know,
that's
you
it.
learn how to survive through. And part of that survival is putting on the face. Everybody does it differently. But the objective is to survive through it. Your mind does something, it's instinctual.
It's true.
It turns on and it moves forward.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, especially when police get involved, everyone gets involved, most question is, why are they still doing this? They don't realize these people are psychologically engaged. It's like you have to turn off the switch. And the only way you can do that is if you start reprogramming.
So it goes back to what we talked about.
Exactly.
And that's, I think that was probably the hardest part of getting through the series of development and counseling was reprogramming my mind that, you know, I am somebody, or you can get through this. You don't have to. And I really want to do a teaching one day on dynamics.
Yes.
Because family dynamics, coming, like you said, you had that abuse, but that family dynamics, it's a mess.
It is absolutely a mess.
It's a mess.
And just like we talked about repeated behavior with people becoming abusers, think about the victim. There are people who say victims attract people to them. So abusers, they know who they're looking for.
You're so
oh,
right.
She looks vulnerable, I'm going to pick her.
You are so right.
And you'll have a woman who, she may get out of one
point.
relationship and go into another, and she's beating herself up more because she doesn't understand how she keeps finding them or how they find her. It's because she didn't do anything wrong per se, but there's something about her persona that is saying, you can do it to me, it's okay. And so they have to reprogram themselves to not put off that type of energy.
If somebody came to you and they told you, Attorney Thompson, I'm going through so and so and so and so, what would you tell them?
They need to seek help.
Okay.
They need to first find a safe person that they can talk to in confidence. On Long Island, it's a safer center. Every region has like a local domestic violence organization.
Okay.
So I would, if I were a person, if it was a client, I would find out what is local and direct them there. Because I think a person needs to feel like whatever they say is in confidence first.
Right.
They may not tell me everything, and that's fine.
Right.
But they need to know that they can talk to someone and start that process of healing.
Wow, that's really interesting. Well, I have to tell you, I applaud you.
Thank you.
I really do for what you do, because what I hear is you're talking, and not just from the last show, your passion.
Absolutely. I mean, I lived through this. As a child, I was a child who watched domestic violence. And then separate and apart from that, I was abused.
Wow.
And I learned how to create my own world. And it's not an easy thing to do, but I recognize it when I see it in children especially. I recognize that pretend. It was pretend play. I had my own reality. And we have to stop that cycle. We have to, and I feel like I did endure what I endured so others could be healed.
You know, when you were just speaking again about cycles, the word I thought about was checked out. You know, you go to the grocery store and you buy your groceries and you're like, okay, you're at the checkout line. Yeah. And I know for a fact I checked out. Absolutely. There was like certain times I know somewhere in the scheme of all of that, I checked out. And I was thinking about my oldest brother. He checked out, but he really checked out. Like he passed away, and he was abused. He was abused too by my stepfather, and never had the opportunity to find out Attorney Thompson or a WIN show to just be able to hear a sound that sparks some kind of, man, I can get some help. Because, and the reason I'm saying it with the men is because it's like, I think you said it earlier too, it's not just women that go through it. What about the man that goes through it and they really can't do anything about it? And to me, that's a whole nother signal, because, you know, the sexual part of a man being abused, and it's just, it does. You know, can I tell you, I think we might, I know I drive you crazy, but we might have to do a part 3 to this. We might have to do a part 3. But let me tell you, Mikila, I want you to look in that camera. If there was something that you had to say to encourage a family, you know, it might be a child that's watching, knowing their parents going through. Can you encourage that child today?
There is always someone out there that can help you. Find, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a friend, whether it's any person that you trust, an aunt or uncle, let them help you. Find a safe place and go from there, and let your healing begin, because it can and it will if you want it to be. But never blame yourself. Move forward and prosper.
Listen, I want to thank you for tuning in today. This has been one of the most resourceful, I have to say, shows that I love talking about that. Granted, because I've come out of a portion of it, but it really does give resources and help to people. And you know what I always tell you? The best that you'll ever be is what we allow each other to become. I'll see you next time on The WIN Show.